So last week, The Wedding Singer turned 20. I'm a little bit late to the party, but since this is one of my favorites, let's talk about it. So The Wedding Singer is an 80s set rom-com starring Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. In the film, Adam Sandler plays a wedding singer who has his heart ripped out when his fiancée doesn't show up to their wedding. Around this time, he meets Julia, played by Drew Barrymore, and he agrees to help her plan her wedding. But this causes problems as they start to form feelings for one another. For me, this movie is both one of my favorite rom-coms, and it is my favorite Adam Sandler movie. But before I get started, go ahead and tell me down below in the comments section, what do you think about it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Have you seen it? I know I've got some younger viewers, maybe you haven't seen this movie because it's 20 years old, which makes me feel a little bit old. As I go through this, I'm not going to go into too many spoilers. It's 20 years old, so I'm not going to be super cautious, but I'm also not going to dive in full in on spoilers for the movie. Also, I'm reviewing this movie because one of my patrons over on Patreon, Michael Ramos, recommended that I review this movie. I saw him recommend it. I went, that's one of my favorites. I would love to rewatch and talk about that movie, especially because it's its 20th birthday. So I decided to do so. If you don't know what Patreon is, essentially it's kind of like the SeanChandler fan club. I put some exclusive videos over there. I do a live stream every Sunday. They can ask their questions, and it's a smaller group. So, if you ask a question, I definitely respond to you. So it's just kind of like that. There's different kind of grades to where you can do things. People that support me at a certain level are able to request movies that I review over here on the channel, like the one you're watching right now. So if you're interested in joining the community over there and kind of have a little bit more access, got a little bit of influence on where their channel goes, please consider supporting me over there. You can see the names down below of my current patrons, and thank you to all of you for supporting my channel. With that said, let's get started talking about the good. What makes this movie so great is the ambiance of the film. Whether you're talking about the 80s setting, the soundtrack, or the characters that populate this world, it's just such a fun, vibrant environment to be in. So let's kind of break each of those down. It's set during the 80s, and that fits perfectly with the story that they're telling, because the idea of a wedding singer today feels so foreign and distant, but it feels like it fits nicely into the 80s, especially kind of the music setting of this movie. We'll get into the soundtrack in just a little bit, but because it is such a music-centric type of movie, it fits that time period to have this type of character, and it contrasts nicely one of the themes throughout it of, do you pursue your passion and what you love, or do you go for security and money? And the 80s kind of had that time where a bunch of people were making money on Wall Street. That ties into one of the characters in the movie, and perhaps the temptation that our lead character is pulled towards in the movie, and that feels very 80s. Those were the types of things that were coming up at that time in discussions being had. So the 80s setting both kind of gives a nice skin to the story of just how over the top the 80s were and how fun of a time period to kind of poke fun and do an exaggerated version of what the 80s looked like. So it just creates an ambiance that's very fun. From there, you move on to the soundtrack. It's filled with 80s nostalgia hits. Like, it's not going for the punk, it's not going for the hair metal. This is like the new wave pop, big hit type stuff, the love ballads, and it just saturates the whole movie from beginning to end. So it's just like a great soundtrack if you're into 80s pop music, which I am. And so both in what Adam Sandler's character's singing, or kind of his sidekick sings doing the Boy George stuff, or just throughout the movie as these songs play, an amazing soundtrack. That there's like, I think that even when it came out, there were two different soundtracks for the movie because there's so many hit songs throughout this entire movie. And I think maybe my sister and I both had a copy of the soundtrack, or each one of us had one of them. I just remember listening to it a lot, and I remember coming home and my sister listening to different songs from it. Or maybe those are false memories that I have, but one of the great soundtracks of all time. And then the thing that just makes this movie work, and as a rom-com, as a comedy that you love, is the characters that are in this 80s setting. Whether you're talking about Adam Sandler's Robbie, who just, in certain ways, feels very Adam Sandler, probably because this is my favorite of his movies. It came out right when I was in the dead center of high school, and it's of his movies the one that I've almost certainly seen the most. So it feels very Adam Sandler. But if you contrast this character to Big Daddy, to Happy Gilmore, Those other ones were much more the man-child than you see here. Here he's kind of a really nice, sweet guy that's a musician, that's got some Adam Sandlerisms to him, but he's also quite different. He's not just this wildly irresponsible person, while still having this sense of he's not picking the secure path, he's picking the artistic path. So all these make for a unique character among the roles that Adam Sandler has played, and he has such great chemistry with Drew Barrymore. And they've done several movies since then. None of them compare at all in any way, shape, or form to The Wedding Singer, but they've done several roles together, and they just play so well off each other, as you have her just kind of as this sweetheart girl that's a little bit innocent, a little bit naive, and doesn't realize that people around her aren't making the best choices. She's a little bit in love with love herself and looking to get married, has that love bug, and looking in perhaps the wrong places. So as these two characters come together and you see that they belong together, there's miscommunications along the way. All of it fits so perfectly together. But it's not just them that you like. The whole movie, the sidekicks, their friends, everybody plays well off of who our two kind of main lead sweetheart characters are. And their friends are kind of the dumb 80s characters, the caricatures of what you think of the partiers from the 80s that were just living wild, crazy lifestyles, whether his buddy that keeps dressing like Michael Jackson and getting involved in one-night stands, the sister character who is also involved in some less than wise life choices, or the fiance who's the Wall Street guy with money and living the party lifestyle. It just creates a nice balance of characters and different archetypes of 80s characters, just filled with a world that you enjoy. And it's really funny from beginning to end. All sorts of little moments, subtle jokes, big broad comedy, just a nice mix of the Adam Sandlerisms with just rom-com, good old-fashioned pure comedy, mixed all a little bit together in there, which leads me to the mixed aspects of this movie, which is that it's an Adam Sandler comedy from the 90s, which means it has some pretty base humor to it. It gets a little bit crass at times, and we put it on as our kids were like on our couch falling asleep, and we were like, oh, wait a minute, this gets a little bit more PG-13 than we remembered from last time, so we ended up holding off till they fell asleep to actually watch the movie. And there's quite a few things like that in the movie that are a little bit more crass than I remembered, more vulgar in certain ways, and talking about people hooking up, someone needs to get laid, that type of stuff throughout the whole movie that doesn't feel like it needs to be there. It feels like it's a little bit out of place with how kind of sweet at the core of the comedy is, with the relationship of our two lead characters. From there, we'll move on to the bad, and a couple things come to mind. The first one, talking about kind of the crass nature of the humor, rewatching this movie 2 nights ago, it feels extremely dated in its perceptions of what's appropriate to display of how males treat women. In light of all of the hashtag Me Too stuff and Time's Up stuff, you watch the movie and throughout the whole thing, there's ongoing jokes about guys just grabbing Drew Barrymore's butts, whether it's old men or young boys that can kind of get away with this stuff. That's kind of populates the whole movie. There's a joke about a girl like showing a guy her boobs just so that he'll stop messing around with her. All sorts of stuff like that. That as you're watching the movie, it's like, wow, culture has changed so much over the last 20 years that this stuff is so casually thrown in there. And now it's not like it's just like, yeah, of course, boys are supposed to do this. But it's in there like, old men misbehave, little boys misbehave in ways that you don't really make jokes like that anymore, so it can feel very out of place. And the big one where there's some story problems in this one. They didn't really know how, they wanted to end with kind of a big shebang. They wanted to have a little, not spectacle, but they wanted to have some big gesture at the end of the movie. And the way it all kind of comes together, it has to kind of lean into some contrivances and coincidences for the finale to work, where it's setting on a plane and some things just kind of fall together perfectly, as opposed to the actions being driven by our characters. And it feels a little bit like they worked themselves into a corner of like they'd had miscommunications, which good. They'd had elements to where the competing values within our characters lead them to make bad choices. All that's good. But then they wanted to have that sweetheart big finale, and it led to them having to it always feels like it's cheated a little bit once you get into that last 10 minutes. It's not a bad last 10 minutes. It's a very good last 10 minutes. I like it. but it doesn't feel earned the way so many things come together. And if you're watching the movie and it's like someone sitting in front seat and then they realize that person's right there that's famous, and then they realize other people are elsewhere, and all the ingredients just come together to have a finale that is completely and totally contrived. With all that said, I think this is very solid Adam Sandler movie, very solid rom-com, amazing relationship between the characters, amazing soundtrack, fun, funny, not amazing cinema, but easily an A- for me, a movie that I thoroughly enjoy, and I would actually go, this is a 9 out of 10 on the entertainment level for me. I love this movie. I can rewatch this movie almost at any point in time, incredibly rewatchable and enjoyable on many different levels. This is one of my favorite movies, of all time. So that's my take on the movie. How about you? Tell me down below in the comment section. Also, what's your favorite Adam Sandler movie? What's your favorite rom-com? I'd love to hear your take on those things. And as a reminder, this video was brought to you by one of my patrons over on Patreon, Michael Ramos. Big thank you, big shout out to you for all your support over there. And if you'd consider checking out my Patreon page to see if it's right for you, if you want to support my channel. No pressure, no obligation. I'm going to keep posting videos over here. But if you like what I'm doing, want to go that extra mile to support my channel and maybe join in on some of those live streams or have some access to recommend some movies I review, please consider supporting me over there. And if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos. But the key thing is I don't want to just talk about movies. I want to talk about movies with you. So please join me down in the comment section. Let's have a lively discussion. Please consider joining me over on Patreon, supporting me, joining the community over there. And as always, thank you for watching.